In the heart of post-apartheid South Africa, a television drama emerged, ready to rip open the fabric of society and expose the raw, unfiltered pulse of township life. Yizo Yizo, a show that dared to confront the stark realities of education in the country's most neglected corners, captivated the nation with its gritty, unflinching portrayal of survival amidst chaos. It was a show that birthed superstars and archetypes that would forever echo through the cultural landscape, leaving an indelible mark on the collective consciousness. But Yizo Yizo was not without its shadows. Beneath its captivating veneer lay a dark side, a dangerous allure that threatened to consume the very youth it sought to portray. It was a show that glamorized violence, normalized vulgarity, and painted a bleak picture of Black South Africans as inherently prone to vice. The line between entertainment and reality blurred, and the impressionable minds of young viewers were left grappling with a distorted perception of the world around them. I was in primary school when the show took over the country, and almost overnight we went from being obsessed with Pokemon and Dragon Ball Z to being foul-mouthed, make-believe gangsters, and many lost the make-believe element and are still dealing with the consequences to this day. This is the untold story of a show that not only negatively shaped a generation, but also left us questioning the thin line between fiction and reality. The favorite rebuttal when discussing Yizo Yizo's negative impact on South African society is the claim that the show was merely depicting what was already happening in the ghetto, and it cannot take blame for the ills in society, as if the show is some kind of documentary. So in order to properly delve into how exactly Yizo Yizo destroyed South African society, we need to first answer the question: does what people, and more especially kids, see on TV actually affect their behaviors and attitudes? In other words, does art merely imitate life, or does life also imitate art? Contrary to popular belief, there is a mountain of scientific evidence that proves that the media we take in affects people, especially kids, to a massive degree. Decades of research have forged unbreakable links between television and real-world violence. Let's begin with what happens when television first arrives in a new area. A striking 1992 study in the Journal of the American Medical Association tracked violent crime rates. They found that around 10 to 15 years after television became popular in a region, they saw the rates of assault, rape, and murder double. The interpretation was that television acted as a kind of time bomb. After the first generation of kids raised watching TV came of age, violence spiked, perhaps because of exposure effects accumulated since early childhood. Other work has drilled down into the amount of TV viewing. Scientist Jeffrey Johnson ran a famous longitudinal study for 17 years following over 700 families. He found that teenagers watching 1 to 3 hours of TV daily were 60% more likely to commit violent crimes as young adults compared to those watching less than an hour per day. Most disturbingly, those watching over 3 hours daily were 600% more prone to violence. This reckoning held true even eliminating other risk factors like poverty or psychiatric illness. Emerging research is also examining how exposure to media violence may physically restructure the brain in ways that promote aggression. Using functional MRI brain scans, scientist John Murray found that when children viewed violent scenes, their neural activity mirrored that of people experiencing real-life trauma or post-traumatic stress. Their brains reacted to and encoded the vivid media violence as something serious and real. Additional work by the American National Institutes of Health in 2006 suggests that habitual screen violence can lead to blunted responses in regions governing planning, focus, and self-control. Media seems to numb the neurological foundations that normally keep impulse and emotion in check. So the danger is that television effectively primes young minds for volatility, impairing their ability to navigate real social encounters without overreacting. Reducing television exposure also reduces aggression quite quickly. A Stanford University School of Medicine study from 2007 equipped Californian elementary schools with devices to restrict children's daily screen time. Within just 10 days, they recorded plunges in verbal and physical aggression on the playground. This highlights how screens supplants the social interaction and enrichment that typically develops emotional resilience. Beyond gradual influences on aggression, there is also a correlation between television and suicides. For example, several studies have tracked noticeable spikes in suicides in the days after television news stories graphically depicting suicide cases. A famous 1982 paper in the American Sociological Review first coined the Werther effect, named after a novel infamously blamed for past clusters of copycat suicides. This Werther effect seems to recur through similar televised coverage providing vivid suicidal models. Another group in The Lancet closely analyzed 87 news stories covering youth suicides over 4 years. They discovered over 200 additional deaths clearly tied to and thus triggered by those news stories airing. Beyond self-harm, Researchers have also connected violent TV depictions to ensuing true crimes, mimicking what viewers just watched at home. One 2015 study flagged 3 separate mass shootings that expressly copied scenes from movies or shows aired in the prior week. The internet now fuels this copycat danger even more. For instance, when surveillance footage of actual shootings got uploaded to YouTube, the researchers tied it to a 35% surge in similar gang attacks over the next month as local thugs sought to replicate the filmed attacks. Another critical factor contributing to the escalation of violence is the stark contrast between television portrayals of life and the realities of daily existence. This stark dichotomy fosters underlying sentiments of resentment, frustration, and anger. Beyond the overt physical expressions mimicked from television, a subtler but profound development occurs. Television narratives often present problems and obstacles with swift and tidy resolutions, fostering unrealistic expectations. In a society where individuals are increasingly alienated, have limited interactions with strangers, and harbor growing distrust and wariness, the default setting becomes one with a figurative finger on the trigger. This escalating tension and readiness for conflict become a breeding ground for real-world violence. So in multiple cases, exposure to graphic violence on screen seems to desensitize some individuals while directly implanting ideas, incentives, or methods to violently act out. This combustible mix helps explain why societies tend to see violence rates climb in lockstep with media violence saturation, and the science suggests our psychology remains unequipped to process and resist media violence without real collateral damage. A startling statistic floated by some public health researchers is that television is responsible for at least half of all murders across the industrialized world. Yizo Yizo, purportedly aiming to cast an unfiltered light on the crisis gripping township schools. Yet, this wasn't a drama without controversy. Critics didn't just criticize, they condemned. Accusations flew, with many asserting that the drama portrayed black people exclusively behaving badly, insinuating that such social ills were inherent to black communities. The Sowetan newspaper didn't mince words, describing Yizo Yizo as stereotypically saying that blacks by nature cannot behave. The charges mounted, the show became a lightning rod for accusations of regression, a biased account peddling racist tropes. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Far from unraveling the realities in our schools, as the education department claimed, Yizo Yizo was seen by many as an amplifier of extreme pathologies, devoid of any meaningful structural context. A revealing SABC survey exposed a startling truth. Nearly 25% of students believed it encouraged bad language, and a third of parents blamed it for exacerbating behavioral issues and drug use. Evaluations by the Community Agency for Social Inquiry and the SA Institute for Distance Education revealed that teachers from dysfunctional schools often pointed fingers at Yizo Yizo for their pupils' wayward behavior. For critics, the show wasn't just gritty content, it was a glamorization of violence, vulgarity, and delinquency, a negative model for impressionable youth to emulate. Instead of offering solutions, it spread what can only be described as a diseased morality. The corrosive influence of Yizo Yizo didn't stop there. It struck at the heart of black communities' endeavors to build a just and equitable society, dwelling obsessively on traumatic divisions, airing graphic acts like prison rape with thinly veiled sensationalism. As UKZN professor Kayan Tomaselli passionately argued, the representations of township violence as black violence did little to promote reconciliation. Yizo Yizo wasn't a catalyst for post-apartheid transformation, it became a setback, circulating harmful myths about black criminality and dysfunction that hindered the redress of historical injustices. Claiming an educational purpose, the show eroded not just the on-screen narratives, but the very bonds of family and community. For many black South Africans, Yizo Yizo wasn't a reflective mirror, but a brutal hammer blow against dignity and unity. Fast forward 2 decades, and its legacy is more than just a cautionary tale. It's a stark reminder of the perils that come with graphic content. Yizo Yizo, once thought to expose wounds, ended up deepening stigma instead of fostering understanding. The stakes are high, and the narrative is far from over. As documented by the British Broadcasting Standards Council, the vivid portrayal of violence and antisocial conduct on TV doesn't just entertain, it can wield a negative influence on attitudes and behaviors, particularly among impressionable young audiences. Critics of Yizo Yizo raised red flags, expressing deep concern that its unyielding depictions of rape, assault, and other abuses in schools could inflict trauma upon student viewers. The show's unapologetic refusal to censor such graphic acts hints at a reckless disregard for adolescent mental health. Cross the channel to the Independent Broadcasting Authority in the UK, and a stark revelation surfaces: TV's power as a behavioral model for impressionable viewers. The harrowing acts portrayed in Yizo Yizo not only carried the implicit risk of desensitizing audiences, but also posed a real danger of propagating further brutality through imitation. This clearly alarmed many black South African parents, whose objections underscored Yizo Yizo's failure to acknowledge its impact on domestic environments. Human Sciences Research Council surveys also revealed the anti-educational impact lurid TV content can have. Far from shedding light on social problems, Yizo Yizo, with its obsessive focus on extreme dysfunction, appeared to erode the very foundations of learning. Educators, justly aggrieved, criticized the show for undermining the culture of teaching, providing graphic distractions amplified by peer pressure. In the ruthless glamorization of violence, substance abuse, and delinquency, extensive research paints a disconcerting picture. Yizo Yizo isn't merely an on-screen drama. It's an invitation to harm South African youth. The producers, seemingly indifferent to a plethora of evidence on age-appropriate programming and the antisocial risks of toxic televisual models, set the stage for an unintended reproduction of crisis. Yizo Yizo, publicly poising itself as intending to expose the crisis, paradoxically became a participant in its perpetuation. One of the most troubling aspects of Yizo Yizo was its sensationalized portrayal of gang culture that seemed to glorify violence and illegal acts. Research has extensively examined how media representations romanticizing crime and gangs can negatively influence childhood development. Exposure to tough guy archetypes and depictions of violence as thrilling or power-enhancing can, in fact, desensitize young viewers to harm, foster aggression, and cultivate unrealistic attitudes about criminal life. Yizo Yizo shamelessly revels in scenes of gang members like Chester, who, with unbridled audacity, intimidates students and teachers through assault, vandalization, and drug peddling, unabashedly elevating their confrontational attitudes to a pedestal. Rather than taking a stand against gangsterism, the show's focus on lurid criminal exploits caters to tabloid sensibilities, risking the reinforcement of beliefs that equate violence and defiance with notoriety. The confrontational, hypermasculine posturing by characters like Papa Action further paints aggressive stances as admirable. For impressionable youth, these become damaging role models. The glamorization of dangerous gangs within school settings, coupled with the downplaying of consequences, normalizes a world where violence and confrontation are the order of the day. Youth, lacking positive role models, may find themselves identifying with such anti-heroes, inadvertently encouraging a spiral into further delinquency by suggesting that violence and intimidation are effective means of control. In multiple graphic scenes, Yizo Yizo depicted the epidemic of substance abuse afflicting South African townships. However, representation alone could not inoculate youth against real-world addiction. On the contrary, research indicates vivid media portrayals showing drug use as edgy and empowering can make illegal substances alluring to adolescents. The show's gritty realism in displaying rampant drug peddling and smoking at school risked diminishing the dangers of narcotics. For at-risk youth battling poverty and trauma, such representations foster misperceptions about coping through substance abuse. Studies demonstrate that positive media messaging is vital to reinforce social norms against unsafe behaviors like illegal drug use. Yet Yizo Yizo largely depicted addiction not as a health crisis requiring compassion, but through the lens of edgy genre entertainment. In providing sensationalized models of gangsters and children abusing narcotics, Yizo Yizo transmitted a profoundly irresponsible message. Within an ongoing national struggle against addiction, thoughtless media portrayals that appear to condone or forgive illegal substance abuse directly undermine youth welfare. The show's creators disregarded abundant research on emphasizing prevention over dangerous risk glamorization. My motivation for making this video was in me coming across some of the people I grew up with and realizing that some of them have been struggling with serious drug addiction and prison stints in the time we've been apart. And with some of them, I can recall the moment our childhood changed and we began adopting a glamorized view of substances as well as aggression. At an age where most kids start to feel a void inside of them and begin looking to the world for a place to fit in, a period in time that naturally results in kids adopting more risk-taking behavior in order to impress those around them. Yizo Yizo helped direct that search for meaning and notoriety in a direction of degenerate behavior, and there are many people drug addicted, in prison, or worse, whose descent can be directly attributed to the influence of this show. Listen to what Ernest Msibi, aka Chesta, had to say on the Happy Days podcast.
Inkinga nabo abantwana besigele. Bayahlupha igele. Kuyanyiwe igele. Ngiyakhumbula mfana la sekubhlungu khona ngibona nami ukuthi hayi ngathi nginoshile. Ekushini ngathi simoshile intwana mfethu.
Ho intwana sezenza izinto wena lento yenza kanjani?
Masiya. Besiya phela soyikhuzi.
Oh no so semanibhuku ukuzwakalana anikhuzele young stars.
Kwezinye siya volunteer ukuthi asiyeni ma out mfethu ngesigele nzilo lo principal ucelile wathi akana nyosi 3 une 5000 siyakhuphuka. Ngumla ngithathwa SABC i-Department of Education. Kula bantwana basethoyando bebabhala isigele Chester.